Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. Last week we took a short stop on the island of Jaya, one-shot a villain, and promptly began our journey into the sky. This week it's time to see what the White Sea has in store for us with the Skypiea arc. Skypiea is the 13th arc in One Piece, consisting of a whopping 66 manga chapters and 43 anime episodes, making it the second but certainly not last huge arc in the series. Skypiea begins rather simply, having been set up almost entirely by the preceding arc Jaya. The initial scenery of the White Sea is quite stunning and beautiful, a unique sight, the likes of which we'd never seen before in the series. I love the general aesthetics of sky culture, from their buildings to their people and their fashion. It's all just really cool, which is why I think it's such a shame that the bulk of this arc takes place on Upper Yard, a blue sea island that was formerly part of Jaya until it was sent flying upwards by the knock-up stream. As soon as the Upper Yard stuff begins, the scenery really loses a lot of the magic and mystique it originally had upon arrival, and it just turns into kind of your stock standard forest with a few clouds floating about. A very old forest, mind you, but a forest nonetheless. The main villain of the arc, NL, is a polarizing figure amongst the fanbase. Personally, I quite like him, but I can see why many others don't. His devil fruit, in my opinion, is the most powerful we have seen in the series to date, and I love watching him apply it in a variety of different ways. As a villain though, NL does kind of fall short of the mark. His plan is pretty boring and his strategy consists of, I'm going to do this thing because nobody can actually stop me. So he's just a bit flat in that respect. Thankfully, his immediate underlings sport some nice character of their own to support him. I refer in particular to the great Gedatsu, a much loved character of mine. He is just so over the top in the best way possible, and it makes every scene he's in an intriguing experience. I also really like Ohm and his dog Holy because most of the priests, including Gedatsu actually, are quite weak and rather easily disposed of. However, Ohm brings a much needed sense of power to the antagonists of this arc minus NL. He also has a pretty cool fight against Zoro, which I always appreciate. But we have a couple of other different factions at play during this arc, most notably the Shandian tribe led by Wiper. Now on my first read through, I really didn't care for these guys too much at all. It's only in retrospect that I have grown to appreciate them and their necessity in this arc. Although honestly, I always found Wiper himself to be a pretty cool character, and he is responsible for one of my favorite moments in this entire arc, when he yells at Luffy to ring the golden bell during the climactic fight against NL. But in terms of design, my favorite Shandian is most definitely Braham. He has the super cool bucket hat beanie thing going on, as well as using dual pistols, which is always a key ingredient in the recipe for awesome. Plus, once again, he gives Zoro a decent fight, so I can't help but appreciate him. So every now and then One Piece arcs will have some pretty huge themes attached to them, and in the case of Skypiea, the major theme is undoubtedly faith and belief. While it doesn't hit you over the head with some grand message, Skypiea delves into why we as a society believe what we do, and even poses the question of whether or not we should continue to uphold those beliefs. It achieves this by showing us the risks and rewards of investing faith. For example, the very act of going to Skypiea required a huge amount of blind faith from the Straw Hats, who rode up there on the knock-up stream. The arc is also littered with characters who have the title of God attached to them, from our primary antagonist NL to Garnfall, and even a giant snake, each of whom turn out to be a false representation of God, should there even be a God to begin with. And I think this arc's conclusion on the discussion of faith is best conveyed through the character of Conus, who at the very climax of the arc slips into desperate prayer, admitting that she is completely unsure of whether or not there is a God, but if there is, she asks that they protect those fighting against NL. I'd also like to point out at this stage that I myself am in no way religious, but I still find this to be a really powerful moment. And alright, I don't think I can dodge this anymore. Let's talk about the hate that Skypiea gets from the One Piece fanbase. One of the most common criticisms of the Skypiea arc is simply that it was too long and drawn out, which in retrospect is pretty laughable considering the length of recent arcs like Dressrosa and the ever-elongating Whole Cake Island. However, I can see where the Skypiea haters are coming from. I wasn't hugely engaged in it during my first read-through of it, and I think that stems from the following factors. Firstly, it was the next big arc after Alabasta, which was the culmination of a huge saga, so expectations were still extraordinarily high for Skypiea from the get-go, which didn't allow the arc the time it needed to really kick into gear. Instead, a lot of people just got bored waiting for the necessary setup that needs to happen during every major arc. The other problem with coming straight from Alabasta is that the main villain was always going to be compared with Crocodile, who is an extraordinarily tough act to follow. And it really doesn't help that NL is also a Logia user, which further invites hence the comparison to Crocodile. Secondly, it was probably a questionable decision to have our main characters sequestered on an island with no connection to the world we've built for such a long time. As a result, the world at large was not able to play a key role in this arc as it usually would. There were no pirates, marines, or anything we knew, and as a result it just felt like the Straw Hats weren't having an effect on the world as they usually would. The final issue is that a lot of readers and watchers alike just don't feel the appropriate stakes during this arc. What I mean by that is that in Oda's writing formula, the stakes of an arc are usually summed up with a single character's emotional journey. For example, the stakes of the Arlong arc were conveyed through Nami, Alabasta through Vivi, and even Jaya has something going for it with Cricket. Skypiea's stakes followed the inhabitants of the island as a whole. There are prominent characters like Wiper, Conus, and Garnfall, but I don't feel like any of them effectively embody the stakes of the arc. And in addition to that, the flashback during this arc featuring Noland and Calgara feels really disconnected from the story as we know it. And before I get to why that is, I just want to say that I think this flashback story is fantastic and quite possibly one of my favorite flashbacks in the entire series. The problem is, while it's a great standalone story, I don't think it works very well in the context of the Skypiea arc. We're following two characters in a completely different time period who have nothing but an ancestral connection to the characters we know today, a lot of whom, as mentioned before, don't effectively embody the stakes of the arc. So I think it's a really rough proposition to ask the readers to take a break in action, which was reaching a climax at this stage, in order to follow this flashback. With that said, I think that Skypiea was a brilliant arc in many ways. First and foremost, it is probably one of the single greatest arcs in terms of expansion of the One Piece world as a whole. And while the revelations this arc brought us did not pay off immediately, to this day I look back on Skypiea and go, wow, we wouldn't have that if not for this arc. And what I mean by that is any number of little things that are littered throughout the series. For example, when Kaido made his amazing entry into the story by jumping off a sky island, we wouldn't have had the phenomenal context of exactly how far he had jumped if not for this arc. We also wouldn't have had things like Usopp using the impact dial against Luffy at Water 7, or even Bellamy's eventual return into the story after having visited the island for himself. And yeah, these are all small things, but that's the kind of detailed depth that Skypiea granted the series going forward. The arc itself was also pretty fantastic in terms of the interactions between the Straw Hat Pirates. I particularly enjoyed the early combination of Luffy, Usopp, and Sanji when they were going through the ordeal of balls. Oh, and just while we're on that, Sanji's line just before he defeats Satori, "This is an ordeal of love," is hands down one of my favorite Sanji lines in existence, although the best part has to be when Luffy imitates him afterwards. I also feel we need to mention Nika Robin, given this was her first feature-length arc as a Straw Hat. I especially loved her fight against Yama, and it really disappoints me that Robin kind of really hasn't had a proper fight since, which is such a shame given the potential that this matchup showed. Speaking of action, I think that Skypiea was pretty spot on for this attribute, featuring a lot of captivating fights. The combat had an added layer of dynamism thanks to the technology and abilities of the Sky Citizens. The hits felt hard and the finishing moves were glorious. I speak in particular of the iconic Golden Rifle, Luffy's final attack used against NL. All in all, I think this arc is best consumed in 1 or 2 sittings. I could imagine that reading or watching this for an extended time period could get a bit tedious, given the fairly aesthetically flat location of Upper Yard, and the characters who we don't quite care about anywhere near as much as the other focal points of other arcs. However, Skypiea is still an amazing adventure, and I am incredibly glad that this arc was included in the series, and furthermore, I feel like you're really missing out if you're one of the people who decided to skip it. And that pretty much does it for Skypiea. Next week we'll be landing back onto the Blue Sea to engage with what is pretty undeniably the strongest comical arc in the series, Long Ring, Long Land. If you enjoyed this video, then feel free to like, favorite, or subscribe, and please do comment with your thoughts on the Skypiea arc. This has been the Grand Line Review, and I'll see you next time.